happy Monday. I'm just going to check, my sound seems to be working, so we should be fine. Right, so things, all sorts of things. Actually, some slightly good news. I was actually trying to find something else. I was actually trying to find something in the Times that I saw flag up on Twitter. I can't find it. I'm wondering now if someone basically photoshopped it. I suspect not. I suspect it's genuine, but I cannot find it. But I found something else. It's from last week. I missed it from last week. And it's vaguely good news. Now, let's start with the bad news. This is based on some polling in YouGov. I actually can't find the bloody poll either. But I've got the article on it. So I've got the results. So let us look at where we are in terms of the next election, because lots of people are panicking about the next election. And, we should be concerned, but we should not at this point panic, despite the fact that Labour are making a proper arse of all their communicating. So here we go. Oh, let's get my head out of the way. So this is the current Westminster voting intention. So Reform UK 7 points ahead of Labour. Now, you may have seen some polls again flying on social media go, oh, Reform UK like 12 points ahead. No, they're not. Not that it really makes any difference. 7 points, 12 points. At this point of the parliamentary cycle, the actual amount doesn't matter so much as the fact that Labour are well behind. So it really makes no difference. But YouGov are provably like the most... Ipsos Mori are good as well with voting intention polls. They are both the provably decent ones. But YouGov consistently show themselves to be the most accurate in voting intention and MRP polls. But it's still bad news. It's still Labour way behind Reform UK when Labour are doing a lot of popular stuff that people just don't know about. Like when people poll them, oh, would you approve of this sort of policy? And they go, yeah, this is brilliant. And they just don't know Labour are doing it. So there's that. So that's the situation we're in. So we're looking at the election. I keep saying I think this is going to narrow quite a lot for the next election because, first of all, what Labour are doing isn't that evident to a lot of people yet. And yet some of it will be. Some of it won't be. Some of it is unfortunately a problem because Labour do need to... I'm just going to make that a bit smaller, actually, because my head keeps getting in the way. Because... Like I keep saying, there's certain things that people will recognise. If the cost of living comes down noticeably, people will know that. They will recognise that. Energy bills have got to be the key target there. There's no other cost of living that Labour can really get much lower. As interest rates fall, yes, things like that will ease pressure on mortgages and even rents as a secondary effect. As they increase house building, that will also ease those costs. But, in the next few years, I don't know to what extent that will be the case. Energy bills have to be, they're the one that the government have control over, or some control over. They have to be able to pay for the energy. It is a privatised system. But it have some control over that. And they should be able to get that down significantly for the next election. Then there's the Best Start centres. Then there's building projects in general. Then, as Keir Starmer was explaining in Brazil, there's the 800,000 jobs in the green tech industry that should be... Now, I don't know whether that is 800,000 net new jobs. I suspect it is, actually, because part of the green energy drive is not just to create this new industry, but to move skilled engineers from fossil fuels to green technology. And as soon as you can do that, as soon as we are no longer reliant upon the fossil fuel industry for jobs or fuels, then the fossil fuel industry has much less political impact. No matter how much money it slings about, it has much less influence over British politics. But in the medium term, we're still going to be, those jobs in the fossil fuel industry, they're still going to be carrying on for like decades, right? So these should be new jobs. So that would be quite good. So there's various things that should boost Labour's reputation with the public. But we also know they're making a proper arse of the communications. And there are some things they're doing that people don't know about. I'm now starting to think they won't get any credit for the Renters' Rights Bill, or the Renters' Rights Act, as it now is, sorry. Because It's the sort of thing I think you do have to tell, but I don't think people just randomly notice. Like if you suddenly get more rights, how do you know you've got those new rights if no one tells you, right? But anyway, that's the bad news. The good news, well, there's some of it's mixed news. The good news is, and one thing I've said is that Nigel Farage, okay, Reform UK at the moment are polling ahead, way ahead of anyone else, right? So they can claim that they're the most popular political party in the country right now. And that's true, they are. But there are way more people who are opposed to Reform UK than in favour of it. There are lots of people who see Reform UK, as I do, as the worst option, which opens up the possibility of tactical voting. Now, the thing about tactical voting is it does sharpen up as you get to the election itself. So several years out, I keep saying this about voting intention polls. Voting intention polls don't really, a lot of people aren't really thinking about voting tactically when there isn't an election on. Voting intention polls midterm are very hypothetical. It's like, well, what is your ideal choice, right? Come the election, a lot of people are pragmatic, not everyone, but a lot of people are pragmatic and they start to think about realistic outcomes. So tactical voting naturally plays more of a part. And what's really encouraging is this poll, because this is asking people now. So what this shows, oh no, is that the right one? I think this is the right one I wanted to show. Yes, this is it. So this is asking Conservative supporters, Lib Dem supporters, again, I'll make it a bit smaller because my head's too far in the middle, and Green supporters, right? And it asks them, so if in your constituency, it's between Reform and Labour, like your party ain't got a chance, right? It's between Reform and Labour, how would you vote? So Conservative voters are saying 45% would actually vote Reform UK. Okay, that makes sense. There's not a lot between them at the moment. 12% would vote Labour, though. That's not nothing. In a tight contest, that is not nothing. So 12% of Conservative supporters say if in their constituency, it's between Labour and, and Reform UK, and their party's not in it, 12% will actually vote tactically for Labour to stop Reform UK. Of Lib Dem supporters, 12% would vote Reform, which is that's weird for me. That is weird for me because Lib Dem, like you look at Green, only 3% of Green supporters would say, but 12% are Lib Dems. And that's a weird one because in actual fact, Reform UK are not the opposite of the Green Party. They're the opposite of the Lib Dems in many ways. They're the opposite of the Lib Dems. Because Reform UK and the Lib Dems, you could argue economically, like Reform UK are right-wing economically, although they try and pretend they're a bit left-wing as well, but they're not, they're right-wing. The Lib Dems are slightly centre-right economically. They're not opposed to some nationalised services, but they don't generally approve of them. But they do approve of the services, having those public services and regulated. But the Lib Dems' big thing is social policy. They're socially liberal. And Reform UK's big thing is not. Like, Reform UK now, they've just cancelled all their economic policies. So they actually don't have any, technically. They've cancelled them all. And that's because Reform UK are not really about economic policies. They're about social policies, social engineering. So Reform UK are very socially conservative and the Lib Dems are very socially liberal. So those two parties are the opposite. So it's mad to me that 12% of Lib Dems would say Reform UK. So I can only conclude that these Lib Dem supporters are supporters in an area where the Lib Dems can win, but the Conservative, in other words, they're really Conservatives, but they know in their... But anyway, that's my speculation. But nevertheless, 57% of them say they would vote Labour to stop Reform UK. 21% say they'd still vote Lib Dem, to hell with it, I'm using my vote for what I want, okay? But 57% there. And of Green supporters, 46% say in that situation they will vote Labour. 42% say they'll vote for their own party. So the Green Party, and we know this, we actually know this. I'm going to point out a couple of interesting things here. First of all, we know this from last year's election as well, that although there were a lot of Green voters who waited till the last minute because they were prepared to vote for Labour to make sure the Tories got kicked out, And only once they were assured by the polls that the Tories were definitely on the way out, then they voted Green. But they would have been prepared to vote Labour. But we also know that of all the parties, not including Reform UK, but of the hitherto mainstream parties, should we say, that the Green Party supporters are the least compromising. They are the least likely to vote tactically of all of them. So that is sort of... I have seen some people who are like in the Green Party try and suggest they're actually very pragmatic. I mean, 46% to 42, yes, there's a big chunk of them that are pragmatic and they will vote tactically. But they are also the party that is least likely to vote pragmatically. But I'll tell you what's also interesting here. Again, because I haven't seen the actual poll itself, I'm inferring some things, but YouGov are pretty good at this. And what it says here, I want you to note here how they're described. Conservative supporters, Lib Dem supporters, Green supporters. Supporters, not voters. Because in polls like this, sometimes they split people up according to how they voted at the last general election. Calling them supporters, not voters, suggests that no, these are the people who say they would vote for those parties right now. So that's actually better. Because again, if I go back to this, you can see there's a slightly greater percentage of people who say they will vote Lib Dem compared to last year. There's a much greater percentage of people who say they would vote Green compared to last year. So actually this poll is better for polling supporters. This is very good news. This suggests that as long as people know, because that's another big if, people don't always know who the contest is between in their constituency, right? I do. It's really easy to know. There are I always say there's some 3-horse races. There's not very many. In most constituencies, if you get the right information, and like the Stop the Tories.vote website last year had, for almost every seat, it told you who was the best non-Tory vote last time, but it will also give it you for Reform UK next time. It is actually in the vast majority of constituencies and all of the key constituencies, there is information, but not necessarily everyone comes across that information. So it's still dependent on people being aware of who the contest is realistically between. But where people know it's between Reform and Labour, 12% of that, just because it's a really small number doesn't mean it won't make a difference. 12% say they'll vote Labour. That could make the difference. So even the Conservative voters could make the difference. 57% of Lib Dem supporters say they'll do it. That can definitely make a difference. Even though I am going to say in a lot of Labour Reform battlegrounds, you probably don't have a large groundswell of Lib Dem supporters. You don't generally find in these sort of seats a lot of Lib Dem voters, but it's still 57% is a majority. That'll be a few thousand extra votes potentially, right? And 46% of Green supporters also could easily be a couple of thousand, maybe three. That could be a few thousand as well. So this is all really good news. I'll go with some questions before I do, because there's another interesting little bit of the poll. But let's go through some comments first. I say renters' rights bill improvement certainly going to help us personally if people know they have those rights. They need to know they have those. You need to know your rights to be able to exercise them. They're saying I'll probably always vote Lib Dem in my constituency. The alternative is normally the Tories unless Reform surges. Well, exactly. I mean, it's on a constituency. Tactical voting has to show an awareness of not the national picture, but your constituency picture. That is the purpose of tactical voting. It's an awareness of what are the realistic, the credible choices in your constituency, and picking the one you either prefer or least hate, depending on how you want to look at it, whether you're glass half full or half empty. Can we crowdfund for hiring billboards to advertise everything they've pulled off within a couple of years of the general election? Have a QR link to a website too that links back to government pages too. So in terms of the website, that will already exist. There will be two sources of, one will be from Labour itself, so you may consider that biased, but Labour are going to be charting their achievements, but the best one will be Full Fact. They have done a fact checker on Labour's manifesto commitments. Now, if rumours are true, there's going to be a big red cross by one of them after the budget. But nonetheless, that is still going to be it will also be charting their achievements. So, and that will be independent. So the websites will exist. So it'll be more a case, if you want to crowdfund something, crowdfunding a group that will publicise them. So that's what I will be wanting to do. In fact, one of the reasons I left the Labour Party, and I know a lot of people have left the Labour Party because of some of their social policies, and because I am quite liberal and not at all in favour of most of their social policies, that was the reason. But realistically, the main practical reason for me leaving the party, because I wouldn't normally leave the party. Well, I did last time, but I was young then. But normally I would think of it, no, I'll stay in the party and try and argue for better. The reason I left was because I am going to have to explicitly be telling people, in this constituency, you need to vote Green. In this constituency, you need to vote Lib Dem. In this constituency, you need to vote SNP, right? I'm even going to be saying in this constituency, can you vote Conservative? Right? Because before I go to some more comments, let me just throw this one up, because this is also just as important. Actually, it's not just as important, but it is also important. Again, I'll just make it smaller because my head's bloody in the way. So this is now asking, so if you're in a constituency that is between Reform and the Conservatives, so there's no progressive option. Economically or socially, there is no progressive option. You are voting for a right-wing, socially regressive party. Come what may, what do you do? So Lib Dem supporters, 39% will still vote Conservative, compared to 32% their own. Weirdly, you'll notice it's 9% say they'll vote for Reform. So that implies of Lib Dems are weird. Sorry, they're weird. So that, and I know they're small percentages. We don't want to get carried away. But look at it this way. 9% of Lib Dem voters would vote tactically for Reform UK against the Conservatives. But 12% of Lib Dem voters will vote tactically for Reform UK against Labour. Make it make sense. But it's a difference of 3%, right? I mean, that's flat earth territory. We won't worry about that. But 39% say they'll vote Conservative. Of Labour supporters, 34%. So, again, it's a big deal for a Labour voter or a Labour supporter to back the Conservatives. So it's roughly even with how many would vote Labour even if they couldn't win. But again, it could still make the difference. The important thing is 34% is still a big chunk. That is still a significant chunk of voters that could make the difference. And I am going to say a Conservative MP is better. It doesn't matter who it is even. Just having a Conservative MP is better than Reform UK MP. And I'll tell you for why. There's actually multiple reasons. First of all, they are half-heartedly adopting a lot of Reform UK policies. There's still several Conservative MPs. We know they're not very good, but they don't really believe in it. And if you're going to have someone that's adopting batshit policies, far better for it to be an MP that doesn't really believe it. Like, Brexit would have been even worse if it had been led by a party like the Brexit Party. It would have been much worse, right? But the other reason is this is practical. So let's say the tactical voting isn't enough to stop a far-right wave at the next election. Let's say Reform UK get to form a government. There is a difference between them forming a government, a majority government, and forming a minority government. A minority government is much weaker, right? Much weaker. And the Conservatives are very likely to be rebellious. So every seat you flip from Reform UK to Conservatives, even if Reform UK end up in government, is valuable. So I would still say I would 100% in that scenario vote. I would be one of those 34% Labour supporters voting Conservative. I've already voted Conservative once this year for my local mayor. I knew that Labour had no chance. It was between the Conservatives and Reform UK. I voted Conservative. Reform UK still won. I've got Andrea Jenkins as a mayor now. Thank you very much. And then Green supporters only 19%, which is very disappointing. But again, like I say, they are Green Party supporters. We've known from polling, are the least pragmatic of all voters. But 19% could still make the difference. You know, in a tight contest, that could still make the difference. So if you look at all, I might, if I find, I haven't really got a lot of time at the moment, but if I find I've got time, do you know what I might do? I'll use that last YouGov MRP poll and these results. I reckon I can work out a rejigged voting intention poll based on, or even MRP results based on tactical voting. I think you can use these percentages to apply some filters to the latest MRP poll and work out how it would affect the results. It shouldn't take, I don't know how long it'll take me. I might do that at sometime in the next couple of weeks. Anyway, carry on with some more comments. What if Labour, Lib Dems and Greens have a loose electoral pact? They won't, for two reasons. The first of which is, as you can see here, if I put up the other one, there are still people who will only vote for their own, I mean, never mind the Conservatives, obviously antithesis to Labour, but 21% of Lib Dems will not vote for Labour even to stop Reform UK. 42% of the Green Party supporters will not vote Labour even to stop Reform UK. And although it's not covered in this poll, we know there's a large chunk of Labour supporters who will not vote either Green or Lib Dem even to stop Reform UK, right? There are lots and lots of supporters of these parties, and they tend to be the most active members, like literally the members of the party, and the activists and the ones who go door knocking, who will not vote for, like, they will make good the enemy of the great, or vice versa, you know what I mean? So yeah, you can't have an open pact, even a loose one, between them, because the supporters hate each other. They would rather, you know, there's Labour voters who would rather Reform UK form a government than their local MP be a Lib Dem MP, or that they would vote for them. There are Green members, same thing. Lib Dem, same thing, right? That's the first reason. The second reason is the Electoral Commission would go, aye, you're working together so you can share, because you get caps on spending, right? Political groups and political parties have a cap on the amount of money they're allowed to spend. If you start coordinating with each other, they'll go, you're pooling resources, you can share the cap. So it will limit the amount of money they can spend on the campaign. That is a really bad idea. So there cannot be any pact that is evident. If Green voters don't or won't vote tactically, won't that open up another party to win? It is an unfortunate thing with our and it's the fault of the electoral system, not individual voters. I'll keep emphasising that. It's the problem with the system. But it is nonetheless a fact that if you're not prepared to vote tactically, then you invite the worst option rather than the compromise. If you're not prepared to compromise, don't be surprised if you don't get the compromise result, right? Don't be surprised if you get the worst result. That is just unfortunately the case. So yes, at the end of the day, though, people can use their vote as they wish. It's the system that is at fault. And as I say, you know, I mean, look at it this way. These are the crucial seats between Labour and Reform UK. They're the most important seats at the next election. 46% of Green supporters say they'll vote Labour. So the important thing here is just say that's grand. Doesn't have to be all of them. You can't expect it to be all of them. 46% is a very, very healthy chunk. And that could make the difference, absolutely. And it would make the difference in some seats. And so the important thing is to then make sure that everyone knows who the contest is between in every single constituency. So we need to make sure we've got a reliable source of information on it, which at the last election was Stop the Tories Don't Vote. I hope that it's going to be the same thing at the next election. But make sure that people are aware of it. That'll be the important thing there. And then even in, which are still important, they're not as important, but they are still important. Because again, if Labour can win a majority, then these seats between Conservatives and Reform UK, then they don't matter as much. I would still argue they do. We want to limit Reform UK as much as possible to limit the impression of momentum, right? So these are still important. Even if Labour look like they're still on for a majority, they're still important. And even there, 19% are Green supporters. Okay, it's much less. It does risk more Reform UK MPs, but 19% is better than none. It's a lot better than none. That could still mean, and again, I'm going to argue in Reform Conservative battlegrounds, there's probably not that many Green supporters anyway. In those sort of seats, there's probably not that many. If you look at last year's election results, if you look at Reform, in fact, let me just have a quick look at one. Let's have a look now. So let's do an obvious one. No, I'll do Great Yarmouth. I won't do Clacton because obviously Nigel Farage brought a personal thing into that. So if I look at Great Yarmouth, which Reform UK won, in actual fact, Labour was second in that one, but normally you would expect that to be Reform Conservative. The Greens, like Rupert Lowe won with over 14,000 votes. Then you had Labour on like 13,000, the Tories on 10,000, Green Party 1,736. In those sort of seats, and okay, that's one seat. But if I were to look for lots of different seats, I think it would be those sort of seats that swing not between Conservatives and Lib Dem or Conservatives and Green, but Conservatives and Reform. Those sort of seats, I don't think have many Green voters in them. So actually, this sort of seat, the fact that it's a smaller percentage of Green supporters, it's disappointing because literally every vote can count. But, you know, this is more important. You'll get a greater number of Green vote. In these seats are more important, and the Green voters, you're likely to have more of them. So this is more important. As things stand, I'd want to vote Green. Labour may be improving things, but still feeling like Tory light. See, I mean, I'm going to disagree with that. I don't see how they're Tory light on literally anything, but you know, it is a perception. It's what some people believe. But at the end of the day, what matters is knowing who the contest is in your area. You might have 6 different candidates. You ain't got 6 different candidates. You've got 2 candidates and 4 also rans. That's what you've got. You've got 2 candidates and 4 names on a ballot paper that are basically like flak. They're there to attract the missiles, right? They're distractions. There are some seats, like I said, I think the Isle of Wight was split in 2, and I think at least one of them might have been both. I think that was a genuine 3-horse race. At least one of the Isle of Wight, I seem to remember, was really too close to call, and the actual contest itself was really close. So you do get some genuine 3-ways. Not very many. Mostly, it's between 2, and I will know in almost every seat who the 2 are. And that's why at the next election, I expect to be very explicit on my channel and go through every single constituency and say, this will tell you who it's between. And I'm not going to say, vote for this person, even though it will be quite clear I'll want you to. But I will go down every constituency and I'll do it regionally. So I'm not going to do like an hour video where I go down every single one. But I will do it for different regions, different videos. And I know they won't get many views, but I'll put it out there for people who need it. And I will say in these constituencies, this is who it is between. You know, any other candidates on the ballot paper, I 100% guarantee are not in the running. And some of those seats, yes, there will be 3 because I won't be absolutely certain. But in most of them, I will be absolutely 100% certain that it's between these 2. Just a privacy point, us viewers can see your screen reflecting that picture frame behind you. That's not a problem. My screen has what I've just been telling you anyway. There's no personal information on it. MZ saying, I assume this means in your own constituency. Labour and Greens have a minuscule chance where we now live, so Lib Dems are tactical voters. Well, it's whoever it is. I would honestly, as I say, for me, it's really clear. For me, Labour. That's who I support. So in any seat where Labour have a realistic chance, I'm going to vote Labour. Then it's if if Labour aren't in it and it's between anyone else and either the Conservatives or Reform UK, I will happily vote Lib Dem, Green, SNP, Plaid, no problem. Or even an independent. I suppose it depends who that independent is, because independents usually come from a political party. Then if it's between Conservatives and Reform UK, I'll vote Conservative. I've got a really easy... There's no sweating it for me. There's no dilemma. An election is between mostly two candidates. And I'm really clear what the order is for me. My seats are genuine three between Labour, Conservative and Reform UK. Well, that's easy. You just have to, you vote for who you want. But I mean, for me, that would be easy, Labour. Like if it's a three-way, and in fact, that's actually quite good. A three-way between Conservative and Reform and a Progressive Party, piece of piss. You just try and unite the Progressive vote behind Labour, and you get, and that's straightforward. That's actually a piece of piss. Where it's difficult is, let me just have a look. I'm gonna have a look at just as this last little thing, because I'm quite sure at least one, if not both, of the Isle of Wight ones. So I'll go for Isle of Wight East first. Why not? Oh, actually, I can see Isle of Wight West was won by Labour. Isle of Wight East was won by the Conservatives. So let me have a look at the detailed results for the Conservative East one. So this was a right beauty. This was, in fact, I'll just show you it, because this was a tactical voting nightmare, and because I remember there was no stopthetories.vote couldn't tell you who to vote for here, even right up to the day, and this shows you why. So the Conservatives won on 10,400, right? Reform UK was second on just over 7,000, but then look at this. Greens 6,313, but then Labour 6,264. Like, it was so close between the two progressive options there that no advice could be given, because what Stop the Tories wanted to desperately avoid was giving you advice that turns out to be wrong, and they didn't. They didn't actually get any decision wrong on a seat that went to either Reform UK or the Conservatives. So in other words, they didn't steer people. They had 100% accuracy in terms of that. It's just that they couldn't give... I remember this seat, they couldn't actually give you the tactical choice, because it was just, the polling was suggesting it was far too close between the Greens and Labour, and so it turned out. I don't know whether you would call this a four-way, because realistically the Conservatives ended up being significantly ahead, but you always have to view that there's someone. So I would call this, this arguably was like a four-way. Because if you think about it, like, imagine that half of those Lib Dems and Labour voters had voted Green. Let's say it had been clear that Green were the best one of the progression options. If half of those Labour voters and Lib Dem voters voted Green, then they would have won. They would have won. So you would call that a four-way, because that's how I sort of view it. If half of, the voters of the top progressive, if half of the voters of the non-top progressive choice vote, or even 40% vote for the top progressive choice, would that allow them to win? If the answer is yes, then yeah. Tunbridge was another seat like that. There were a few. There's not many, but there are. You do sometimes get them. But they're not likely to make the difference at the national level in terms of who forms the government, right? So there's plenty of seats where it will be obvious, where if you can like get this tactical voting mojo going, even in those seats, if even in just the Reform Labour seats, you can actually get 57% of Lib Dem supporters and 46% of Green supporters back in Labour. In those seats, you can keep out Reform UK. That'll do it. I reckon that'll do it, right? And I'm going to point out something else which is hopeful. This is now. This is based on the here and now, where people think Labour are cocking everything up. They even think they're cocking the economy up because the media is telling them, right? In a few years' time, I think more people will recognise. I'm not saying that everyone will go, oh, Labour, it turns out they're absolutely marvellous. Oh, of course they'll vote for them. But I am going to say this. I think people will appreciate some of the achievement. Labour are going to have achievements in a few years' time. In fact, in 2 years' time, 2 years' time today, there will be achievements that people will be aware of. So those numbers, if anything, you would think will surely go up, because those numbers are based on that 57% of Lib Dem supporters, 12% of Conservative supporters and 46% of Green supporters. They are thinking two things, right? To make that decision, then they're thinking two things. First of all, that Reform UK would be horrendous in government and we will not allow that to happen. The second is that Labour are all right. Labour are acceptable, even if they're not what they would like. They're acceptable. Okay? The acceptability of Labour, I think, will go up. The unacceptability of Reform UK, I think, will go up. And I think it will only get worse as people look at what's going on in America. Right? But anyway, last couple of comments, then we'll have to get back. Labour should back PR on the next manifesto to join the tactical vote. I agree. Well, I agree they should do it. Whether it will bring in the tactical vote is another question, because Reform UK could say they'll do the same thing, at which point you still draw in the progressive tactical vote. They should still do it, but maybe joining the single market would be a bigger one. Think it's going to come down to this budget, breaking the manifesto when swearing last year. Reeves never would. No. Nothing ever comes down to something that happens 3 years before the election. It always comes down to what happens in the last year of the election. Always. That is why it is usual political wisdom to if you think you're going to win, if you're the government and you're looking good, you have an election after 4 years, not 5. Reason being that they know if something goes tits up in that last year, you're knackered. So what matters is what happens in that final year. That's why, ironically, I talk about needing to get energy bills down. Strategically speaking, it's very cynical this, but politics is cynical, sorry. Strategically speaking, let's say Labour could reduce energy bills by £300 tomorrow, right? They can't, but let's say they could. They would be well advised not to. It would be better. In fact, if they could reduce bills by £300 tomorrow, if I were an advisor in Downing Street, I would say to Keir Starmer, don't. I would say, reduce it by £100 next year, then another £100 the year after, then another £100 the year after. Because then what will happen is it'll have gone down by £300 by the next election, but the Tory media won't be able to claim that it's just a pre-election bung, because you'll be able to say it's been coming down for years. So strategically, what you want is for people to notice the improved standard of living during election year. Take the last time Labour in government. Standard of living rose. Even after the 2005 election, the standard of living went up. Then we had the global crash, then it came down a bit. That's what people remembered. They remembered the last year. They remembered living standards falling in the year before the election, not them rising in the years before that. So what happens at this budget? I'm not saying it's not make or break. I actually do think it is, but that is in terms of the fact I think Labour. I don't want to lean too much into all this media speculation about like getting rid of Starmer, but I do think there's a risk Labour MPs could get jittery, right? So it's make or break from that point of view. But in terms of with the public, nothing they do in this budget is make or break. Nothing at all. Unless, of course, they do a Liz Truss. If they crash the pound, then yeah, that's definitely break. You're never recovering from that. But there we go. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a great rest of day. I shall be getting ready to do my epic stream this afternoon on Twitch. Politics Phil. Some of you may join me then. But thanks for coming on. Have a great day. Until next time, I'll see you later.